Intellectually arrogant to an extraordinary degree, and in the end, that was their undoing.
By the spring of 1940, the Cambridge Five found themselves in the middle of the greatest military enlistment in Britain's history. Overnight, top-secret organizations like MI5 and MI6, the domestic and foreign divisions of the Secret Service, were expanded. The sudden need to staff newly created war agencies provided opportunities for two of the Cambridge Five to enter the clandestine world of British intelligence. Donald Maclean entered the Foreign Office, the diplomatic corps of the British government. Maclean had access to top-secret political plans, but Guy Burgess would be the first Soviet spy to compromise the British Secret Service.
Guy Burgess was effectively recruited both by the Secret Intelligence Service as a propagandist and who had a knowledge of radio, and by MI5, who used his homosexual talents to recruit and run agents. So he had, in effect, feet in three different camps: the homosexual world, the journalistic world, and the secret world.
Burgess's contacts were considerable and his intellect highly regarded. At first, his eccentric behavior was not only tolerated, it was valued.
You would think that such a man who drew such attention to himself was not the ideal person to be a spy. But it works both ways. People would say, Burgess is a spy. You know, Guy couldn't possibly be a spy. I mean, look at the way he behaves. So his outrageous behavior was actually, you could argue, a good cover for being a spy.
MI6 was Britain's top-secret agency. This secrecy made it easy for Burgess to recommend Kim Philby. Philby's first assignment in the British Secret Service was in Section D, a new division designed to help defeat the Germans through secret missions and dirty tricks. During the day, Philby trained recruits in the uses of propaganda. At night, he helped himself to the secret information contained in MI6 files.
He's able to go through methodically, file by file, noting all contacts throughout Europe. And this is gold dust for the KGB.
Thanks to Kim Philby, the Russians knew the identity of most of the MI6 agents operating in Europe. Throughout World War II, Guy Burgess, Kim Philby, and Anthony Blunt were stealing intelligence from their peers. But it was John Cairncross who would give the Soviets some of the most important secrets of the war.
The fifth man, the last of the Magnificent Five of new Cambridge graduates to be recruited by the KGB, is John Cairncross. But up until the end of the Second World War, he's arguably the most important British agent that the KGB has. More important even until that point than Kim Philby. Why? Well, partly because he runs through such an extraordinary sequence of highly sensitive jobs.
In 1941, John Cairncross's expertise in mathematics brought him to work at this secret government office, an old mansion known as Bletchley Park. Bletchley Park was the home of a top-secret division of MI6 dedicated to breaking the German code. The decrypted German communications, codenamed Ultra by the British, were the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Cairncross had daily access to this critically important intelligence, and he passed it along to his Soviet handlers.
John Cairncross was able to supply ultra-intercepts that were directly relevant to German troop movements on the Eastern Front, and he is widely credited as having made a very significant contribution to the Battle of Kursk.
At Kursk, 6,000 tanks and 4,000 airplanes took part in what would go down in history as the largest tank battle of the Second World War.
It is the German intercepts provided by Cairncross which tell the Russians where the German airfields are on the Eastern Front. And before the Battle of Kursk, the Red Air Force is able to bomb them, and even by contemporary Russian analysis, that makes a really important difference.
Thanks to John Cairncross, the intelligence the Russians had on the Germans was some of the best of its kind in the history of modern warfare. But stealing the secrets was only half the challenge. Methods had to be devised to transfer the information to their Soviet handlers.
There were two theories about this. One is it's a good idea to meet in an isolated spot where you can see for miles around that there's nobody near keeping an eye on you. Other theory is that it's best to meet in a very crowded place where the idea of people chatting and exchanging papers and talking and being busy and everything like that is that you lose yourself in the crowd.
Kim Philby often preferred to take important papers home, copy them, and then arrange to leave the copies in a secret location.
One method of communicating was with a thing called a dead drop. And as the name implies, it's a drop where the agent will leave material for the KGB officer to pick up. After the agent had left it there, hoping that nobody else would accidentally pick it up, it would be collected very shortly afterwards by the KGB officer.
Despite the risks of meeting in London, Guy Burgess preferred to meet the Soviets in public. Occasionally, things went wrong.
He met one of his controllers in a pub in London, carrying secret papers that he'd smuggled out of the office that day. In the process of handing them over to the Russian, he dropped them and they were scattered all over the floor of this pub. And there was a policeman having a drink, off-duty drink at the time, who actually bent down and helped them pick them up and put them back in the folder again.
In communicating with your contact, it's not only important to obtain information from him, but also periodically to hold personal meetings, face-to-face meetings. It's very important from the point of psychology, because an agent, he's alone with his secret. He has nobody to share it with. And his contact, his intelligence officer, he's the only person who can discuss most things with him.
While the Russian military used the secrets provided by Cairncross, Joseph Stalin didn't trust some of the information coming from the Cambridge Five. Stalin's paranoia infected the agency charged with evaluating the intelligence supplied by the Cambridge Five. Why, the Russians asked, didn't the British Secret Service have major operations directed towards the Soviet Union? They didn't believe the truthful answer found in Philby's reports.
There was a war on. Britain didn't actually have time for major operations in Russia, as well as against the enemies, Germany in particular. The KGB can't believe that. I mean, there is a paranoid mindset which is not limited to one or two officers, but which is the politically correct attitude in the KGB at that point. So when Philby says that there are no major operations against the Soviet Union, which was the absolute truth, they think that this is deception.
During the war, Joseph Stalin had unparalleled access to the military and political secrets of both his enemies and his allies. More importantly, thanks to members of the Cambridge Five, the Soviets had meaningful information about Britain's atomic program. They had joined forces to beat a common enemy, but by 1946, Western leaders were already casting a weary and nervous eye towards the Soviet Union. The Cold War was heating up, and the Cambridge Five were soon to feel the pressure of spying not for an ally, but for an enemy. During much of World War II, the Cambridge Five had been spying for an ally, but the Cold War heightened the danger of their actions. By the late 1940s, Maclean, Burgess, and Cairncross held important positions in governmental agencies. Kim Philby was the only one who stayed in the British Secret Service. Philby's wartime service brought him to the attention of Stuart Menzies. So impressed was Menzies that in 1946 he put Philby in charge of Section 9. It was a new division of MI6, charged with planning counter-espionage activities against the very country Philby was spying for, the Soviet Union. It was a remarkable coup for the Russians.
All the time that Philby was head of the anti-Soviet section of British intelligence, every single operation they mounted, aggressive intelligence gathering operation they mounted against the KGB, had been betrayed beforehand.
One of those operations was the ill-fated Albanian mission. During World War II, secret commandos had been used to fight the Germans behind enemy lines. Many in the West felt that the same strategy could be used behind the Iron Curtain to liberate the countries of Eastern Europe held hostage by communism. Albanian freedom fighters were trained in Malta and sent into their mother country, only to be immediately picked up by officials who were already aware of their arrival.
Philby manages to betray those Albanians who are being infiltrated by sea, by land across the frontier, and by air. They came like lambs to the slaughter. And Philby was responsible for the slaughter.
Just after the war, while Philby was working his way up the ranks at MI6, Maclean and Burgess worked at the Foreign Office, stealing important secrets of Britain's Cold War strategies. Maclean's post at the Foreign Office had taken him to Washington, D.C. during the war. At war's end, Britain and America began planning their strategy to combat and contain the Soviet Union.
Donald Maclean had very considerable, important access to political decision-making, positions that were going to be taken in negotiations with the Soviets, contingency plans, reactions to the occupation of various different countries, treatment of émigré governments, all of which was of very considerable political importance to the Soviets.
Maclean made frequent trips to New York to meet his handler, turning over important information about the Cold War to the Soviets. As a cover, he visited his wife, who was an American living with her mother in Manhattan. But friends and family noticed that Maclean was acting strangely. The pressure of leading a double life was beginning to show. He began to drink heavily and started to raise suspicion with his irrational behavior. The heat in the Cambridge Five was turned up. They led secret lives, knowing that the punishment for treason could be death. Anthony Blunt was the first to succumb to the pressures.
At various moments, all of the Magnificent Five, with I think the exception of John Cairncross, cracked or came close to cracking. The first who really worried the KGB was Anthony Blunt. He was so close to a breakdown at the end of the Second World War that he was allowed to go part-time. He only does the KGB odd jobs, but some of them were quite important after the Second World War.